Assalamu alaikum and good evening. I will request Mowlana Sayyid Ali Abbas Rizvi Sahib to come to address this. As you know, he is most of you have probably seen him on television. He's a leading personality for us, for our community, both here in the UK and across the world, English-speaking world. He has lectured extensively on a wide range of topics, from Islamic theology, Shia history, and of course, Shia jurisprudence. And particularly, I think we're lucky to have him amongst us because not only does he draw upon tradition, but he engages with the youth groups and interfaith organizations. And I can probably go on for much longer just introducing you, but I know many of you have heard him, and I think that's the best introduction.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bismillah.
Appreciate it. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursaleen. Sayyidina wa Mowlana bil Qasimi Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أما بعد. I'd like to thank the Muhammadi Trust for having organized this lecture. We've had a series of 3 lectures, and I believe that London hasn't seen this type of a topic or these type of topics that we've raised from the pulpits and by traditional scholars. And I thank the Trust for allowing us to explore these topics. The topics were quite challenging, and they pushed the parameters of discussion. But nevertheless, I think I'm going to continue from where we left off the last time. The middle lecture was on the Wilayah of Amir al-Mu'mineen, and I think it's fitting that we continue on that. I know some people who have exams weren't able to make it. I know that there's a whole chain of exams going on. The last time, I think that there were about 30, 40 youths as well, but it's exam mode. Nevertheless, for those who are here, thank you for coming. I think your tongue shakes and your soul worries as to how to introduce such a personality like Amir al-Mu'mineen. I think the topic is very fitting. A man who's the perfect man. A man who encompasses, as we said the last time, and controls all of the manifestations of the names and the characteristics of God. A man who's timeless from the very beginning of time to the very end of time, because that is the nature of the perfect man. So 2 things are here. One is the idea of perfection, and the other idea is the idea of man. Man that has been created as the best of all of creations. And so therefore is the best of all of creations. The perfect one of all of creation, therefore, is Amir al-Mu'mineen. And in the same way, absolute perfection is for God. But nevertheless, on the level of manifestation, dhuhur, you find that the most perfect of all of creation and the most perfect of all of manifestation is Amir al-Mu'mineen. In the same way, the very first substance of creation, which was the haqiqat Muhammadi, on the one hand houses all of alam kawn, from the very beginning to the very end, the manifestation of all of the names and the characteristics of God. From that, from the reality of the Prophet, comes the reality of Amir al-Mu'mineen. The haqiqat alawiyya in itself is independent, but at the same time is attached to the reality of the Prophet. So when you look at Amir al-Mu'mineen, you realize, as this is in a tradition within Bihar, narrated by the Imams, says this, that Amir al-Mu'mineen was with all of the Prophets from the very beginning of time, hidden though, batinan. But when they talk about the final Prophet, they talk about the Prophet in terms of he will zahir in front of the people. The reality and the perfection of all of the Prophets lay in Amir al-Mu'mineen. Amir al-Mu'mineen was that sir, that secret, And in this way, I think that there's two things that needs to be understood. The first is this, and it's going to be slightly complex, but I don't apologize for this either, because I think that the trust is pushing boundaries and it's introducing concepts that have not been introduced, at least on a public level. Two realities. One is this physical reality in the world, and the other is a spiritual reality. The spirit and man is a sum of two things. One is the soul and one is the body. The body comes and it perishes, but the fact is that the soul lives on, and the soul is something which is infinite. So from the very first substance of creation, you find this haqiqah of Amir al-Mu'mineen which comes into play. And that reality will continue infinitely. In essence, as long as time is time, you'll find this reality continues. Because Amir al-Mu'mineen's reality is something which is spiritual, is something which is metaphysical. His body in the physical world is a manifestation of that reality. But if you see that spirit, that very first substance, and this is why in a very famous tradition when he says that all of the knowledge of the world can be summed up in the Quran. And all of that knowledge goes back to the Hamd, Fatiha. And all of that goes back to the Bismillah. And all of that goes back to the dot. And then he concludes, he says, I am that dot. I am that dot of creation that all of creation orbits around. You see, within the metaphysical realms, there is no scattering like you see in the physical world. Everything's found at unity. The one at unity, or the most at unity, is the one who's the most perfect. Amir al-Mu'mineen's essence is that dot, that when it opens up, the entire universe is created from that. And so in this way, when you take it back to the very beginning of reality, this is why the Imam Ali says in a very famous khutbah, he says, Ana awwal wa akhir, zahir wa batin. He takes all of the characteristics of God. Here he takes 4. But essentially, if we look at the Imam, all of the dhuhur, he's madhar of all of the names. Everything, all of the names which are manifest, all of the names of Allah infinitely that are manifested in the physical realm, are manifested in the metaphysical realm. Its control, its entire mechanism is found in the Haqiqat Alawiyah, which is Amir al-Mu'mineen. So in this way, when we talk about the perfection of the Imam alayhi salam, the perfection of the Imam is far greater than human beings could understand, because he's the perfect man. And a question was raised, is it possible for man to be perfect in the way that God is perfect? Well, the idea is that God's perfection is completely different. When you look at perfection in terms of creation, everything has a perfection. The glass's perfection is that you fill it up. That's the perfection of the glass. And the watch's perfection is that it conducts what it's there for. The perfection of man, nevertheless, is that it attains Allah. That's the perfection of man. And in this way, when you go to Usul al-Kafi again, you find 2 different types of traditions. One from Sayyid al-Shuhada and one from the 6th Imam alayhi salam. Both of these traditions, and they're fascinating the way that Sayyid al-Shuhada begins to talk. He says that, look, if you go to the Quran, it says that Allah created man, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسِ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. The entire purpose of creation was that creation worships Allah, jinn and man. The tradition then goes forward, the 6th Imam interprets this, and he says the concept of worship here means the concept of ma'rifah. And this is where it supplements with Sayyid al-Shuhada. Sayyid al-Shuhada says here, he says that Allah created man for his ma'rifah, to understand him, to know him. And when he knows him, he worships him. And when he worships him, he removes everything other than Allah from his heart. So the idea of absolute worship is tied with the idea of ma'rifah, divine knowledge. And divine knowledge rests in the idea of love. That we require love as a mover towards divine knowledge. Otherwise, there's nothing that brings that knowledge towards us but the way of love. And this is what you see within all of our imams. And this is what you see within all religions. All religions preach this, the idea of this divine love, this ontological love. And when you look at Shi'ism particularly, you find that this love is living. This love, the entire body of Shi'ism, because Shi'ism is one body. The followers of the Ahlul Bayt are one body, and we forget this. The body is the Prophet, the soul is Zahra, and the nafs is Amir al-Mu'mineen. Within this entire body, what you find is that each one of us are there. And if we're not in sync with each other, if our hearts are not tuned to each other, what we are doing is that we are disturbing the flow of oxygen in this body. And this is why it requires us. And this is why the very famous speech of Fadakiyah, when Zahra alayhi salam comes into the court, and she says something very beautiful. She said that the reason why, and this is a summary of the speech, the reason why our ata'at has been made incumbent upon you to follow us is that as long as you follow us, there won't be any divisions within the ummah. The minute that you stop following us, you find that the ummah will be divided into different sects. And today you're seeing that. You're seeing that even amongst the followers of the Ahlul Bayt, because we are not going on the lines of the teachings of the Imam Ali, what you find is that there are differences that come. Had all of our hearts been in sync in the way that the divine body is meant to be, there would be no issues amongst us, and all forms of negativity would have been removed from our hearts. But because there is a problem in tuning on this wilaya amongst the followers of the Ahlul Bayt, this is why you find that there are differences within us. So in this way, we're one body, one soul. All of our souls combined go back to one soul. And we are one movement, and until we don't realize this, we cannot call the coming of the Imam. There's a very famous tradition that says the manifestation of Amir al-Mu'minin comes at the end of time. And that end of time is seen in Wadi al-Salam. Wadi al-Salam is the place where all of the souls of the believers go. In the tradition it says that we can see the people in Wadi al-Salam, 7 kilometers of a graveyard, and all of these people rise up from their graves. And the minute that they rise up, they are prepared for the coming of that Imam. That when the call of the 12th Imam comes, the tradition says everyone in Wadi al-Salam rises up. All of the souls come into body form, and each one of them rise up and they march towards the Haram of Amir al-Mu'minin. And that is that reality that we're waiting for. For that moment, that is a time when we understand, becomes one sync for us. Each one of us become one. Each one of us become one movement. Why did Karbala take place? And why is it that our 12th Imam has not come into the physical world? And the reason being is this, is the fact that Imam says, the 4th Imam says, in a dialogue with his father, the 3rd Imam, Sayyid al-Shuhada, in Karbala, says this. Imam says 2 things to him. He says, tell my followers 2 things. The first thing he says that tell them that I died here, gharib, so mourn over me. The idea that the Imam was lonely. Many of the ulama have commented on this. They said, had Sayyid al-Shuhada not been lonely, no Karbala would have taken place. The reason why he was lonely, because all of his followers were not ahl to him. In the same way today, when you look at the 12th Imam, the reason why the Imam doesn't come is because there is no ahl to the Imam. All it requires is 40 people, hearts at sync. But today, when you look around, you find that the hearts of the people are not at sync. When the hearts of the people accept and appreciate the movement of that wilaya, only then will the Imam alayhi salam come. Our test, therefore, in the physical world, as followers of the Ahlul Bayt, we will be tested with the wilaya. And in this way, when you look at yourself and see, all of those people, and when the Shi'as are tested, they're tested with everything. Khawf, with fear, Jew with hunger, with all forms of trial and tribulations. Essentially with loneliness. Why? Because the tradition says that all of the arwah of all of the followers of the Ahlul Bayt were found within Karbala. At that moment when Sayyid al-Shuhada said Hal min Nasir, everyone was there. For those people whose souls were with Zainab, they'll feel the loneliness of Zainab. And for those people who were with Sayyid al-Shuhada, will continue to feel the loneliness of Sayyid al-Shuhada. With those people who are with Abul Fadl Abbas, their souls, when they manifest in the physical world, they will feel all of those ways of loyalty and all of those pains and all of those things which all of humanity faces today. That's why you find that the most tested nation on earth are the followers of the Ahlul Bayt. You don't find anybody else. You've been killed and you've been slaughtered and you've been tested in multiple ways. The reason being is that you said labbaik to Sayyid al-Shuhada. And if you're Shia today, understand that you will be tested in every single shape and form. But the most testing of all of these tests is the test of loneliness in your heart and the breaking of that heart. And this is why they say that God resides in the broken heart, and in the very same way, you find this. You find that Sayyid al-Shuhada resides in the heart of those people whose hearts are broken. That is the sir, that is Amir al-Mu'minin. Why? Because as we said, the reality of Amir al-Mu'minin is, and you don't find anyone more lonely than Amir al-Mu'minin, a man who sits there next to a well with his head in the well crying. The purpose being one, that people didn't understand the reality. The reality they didn't understand. It's not the fact that people didn't understand him. For him, it doesn't make a difference. What makes the difference is that this is the wilaya that guides you in the same way that this wilaya guided everyone else from the very beginning of time to the end of time. As this wilaya guided the angels. This wilaya is something which is important. And the question is always asked, how is it possible that Amir al-Mu'minin was all of the prophets? Let's go back to the tradition. You want to hear the tradition? 8th Imam alayhi salam says, and it's a fascinating tradition, where the Imam alayhi salam, Sheikh Saduq mentioned this, Sheikh Qummi mentions this, even before Sheikh Qummi the elder, the one who's 1100 odd years ago, before that, before the establishment of what we find even the Hawza, you find in the time when the Imam goes into occultation, there is a Sheikh who's buried within Qum today. You know what he mentions? He mentions this tradition, it goes back to the 8th Imam. In that tradition he says, Amir al-Mu'mineen was with who? He was with Adam when Adam repented. And this tells us one thing, that the names that Adam used to repent were the names of the Ahlul Bayt, which tells us Allah's mercy can only be accessed in its entirety when you truly understand the wasila of the Ahlul Bayt. This is why it says that when individuals begin to understand the wasila of the Ahlul Bayt, then Allah's mercy shines down upon those people. Otherwise, the rahmah of Allah, yes, Rahman, Allah is Rahman, it's for all of creation, but Rahim can only be accessed by those people who understand the wilayah of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Adam repented, and Adam didn't just ask for Allah being Rahman, he manifested the name of Rahim. When he manifested this name of Rahim, he used the names of the Ahlul Bayt to manifest this. The tradition then goes forward. He says, and I was with Nuh. When Nuh was where? About to drown. When was he about to drown? He was on the ark. And then the tradition says, and I consoled Nuh. Why? Because Nuh was crying. Nuh comes from crying. He cried a lot. Look and see. The same author that writes Wasail or Shi'a, Imam Ali narrates this. He says Noah was crying when he saw the bodies floating on the water. But the tradition goes forward and says this. It says that when a person walks in, says a person walks into Masjid al-Nabawi and the Prophet of God is sitting there. As he walks in, it was a jinn. From those people of the jinn, says a man walks in. And at that moment, Amir al-Mu'mineen walks in. In the tradition, it says that the jinn turns into a bird and he flies towards the Prophet. And he says, Rasulullah, who is this man? He says, why? He says, this man has tormented me. He says, what do you mean? He says, let me tell you something. He says, what? He says that I remember when Nuh was on the ark and I went to the ark with the purpose of destroying the ark so that all of humanity can drown because the jinns were jealous of man. He says, at that moment when I went to hit the ship or the ark, he says, this man came, this young man, and he came and he chopped off my arms. And he said, when he chopped off my arms, I wasn't able to do this. So at that moment, Amir al-Mu'mineen looks up. And at that moment, he smiles. The reality is this, that Amir al-Mu'mineen was with both of these prophets. But the tradition then continues. It says that Ibrahim, alayhi salam, says Amir al-Mu'mineen was with him, and he was that power that cooled down when Ibrahim was being chucked into the fire. And as he was chucked into the fire, he cooled down that fire. And at that moment, that tells us that when man or even any prophet, when he's in dire need of help, who does he call? Amir al-Mu'mineen. Why? Because Amir al-Mu'mineen has been chosen for what purpose? For purpose to help humanity. See, Allah has done what? He's divided the entire universe into particular parts. For example, the entire universe, Alam al-Kawn, rests on 4 angels. Jibreel, Mikael, Israfil, and Israel. All these 4, they say that they're the manifestation of 4 words in the Quran. Alhamdulillah, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, and Malik Yawmiddin. Within all of these 4 rests this hamd, beautiful surah of the Quran. All of creation rests upon that. From Tawheed, the realities of Tawheed are found there. The realities of Nubuwwah are found there. Guidance and the reality of the Day of Judgment is found there. 4 angels holding up the entire universe. Allah Himself, in essence, it's not the fact that He's delegated. He's produced a law within the physical world. And that law is that these 4 angels. In the same way, when you go to our traditions, Sunni and Shia both, you find that when rain comes down, it's because there's an angel, Muwakkal, there. And the oceans because of the Muwakkal. And the sun and the moon. And all of these things are governed in a particular way by angels. In this way, in this universe, whenever man has needed divine help, what happens? That divine help comes in the form of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And this is why when Allah spoke to Adam, He spoke to Adam in the voice of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And when He spoke to Nuh, He spoke to Nuh in the words of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And that in the way that Jibreel brings down wahi, Allah could have put it directly, but He uses Jibreel. In the very same way the tradition says, when Rasulullah goes into the Mi'raj, at that level where even light can't go, angels were created from light. When He gets to the highest level, Allah addresses him on the voice of Amir al-Mu'mineen, and at that moment Rasulullah then says, he says, that is my brother Amir Ali here? And the reply comes, he says, I looked into your heart and I found no one more beloved than you, than your cousin Ali ibn Abi Talib. And for that reason I talk to you in the way of Amir al-Mu'mineen. This is Amir al-Mu'mineen. This is that all of the prophets will help. Isa, the tradition says, when Isa was in the cradle, and as he was in the cradle, he spoke. That substance, that power that was given to him, that quwwah, because in the way that Dhul Fiqar, for example, is not just a sword, when you look at our tradition. In the time of Amir al-Mu'mineen, it manifests as a sword. In the time of the 12th Imam, when people ask, they say when Imam Mahdi comes, how is it possible that everything goes back to swords and bows and arrows? What's Dhul Fiqar? Is it a sword? What can you use? Sword against a tank? And the reply is no, Dhul Fiqar is the defense system of the Imam. In the same way, when you look at the reality of Amir al-Mu'mineen, when Imam or when Allah wants to teach a prophet, He teaches him through the wasil of this haqiqat alawiyah. And this haqiqat, there's a haqiqah, this manifestation of the haqiqah comes 1400 years ago in the shape, the mujassam of Amir al-Mu'mineen. But its reality is infinite, it lives on, it's timeless, it transcends all of prophecy. Why? Because each side of prophecy is a reflection of the names, Asma and Sifat of Allah. And in this way, the entire Asma and Sifat, the mahdar of all of these, the dhuhur of all of these in the physical world is Amir al-Mu'mineen. He's the one who contains all of that reality. So in this way, the tradition then says, it says that Isa, when he talks from the cradle, it's because of that movement, that quwwah that Amir al-Mu'mineen gives him. And then Imam says, I taught Isa the Injil, I taught Musa the Torah. When Musa goes in front of the Pharaoh, no, when Musa goes in on top of that mountain, as he goes on top of that mountain, 30 days he goes into khalwa. The last 10 days to finish that 40 days. The tradition says, Jibreel comes down and teaches him the haqaiq of Sayyid al-Shuhada in Karbala. You cannot reach the highest levels until when? Until you understand the reality of Karbala. What is essentially Karbala? Imam Hussein is another manifestation of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Whatever came from Zahra alayhi salam, 11 Imams came. Each one of those 11 were a manifestation of Amir al-Mu'mineen. What is it? The highest level of wilayah. The highest level of wilayah is Sayyid al-Shuhada's tragedy, to understand that tragedy. But in this way, when you look at all of the prophets, they were all tested. And one of the prophets, for example, Yunus, why was he tested? Why does he go into the belly of the whale for in this way? Yes, there's an entire story when he leaves his people, but one of the highest levels of test on this wilayah is the test of compassion. Yunus left. Allah punished Yunus in the belly of the whale. Why? This punishment is not the punishment that we think about. This punishment is a form of realization. He pushes him through this for one purpose. And that purpose was that Yunus wasn't able to complete all of the stages of wilayah. So he went into the belly of the whale and Allah teaches him a dhikr. That's dhikr of Yunusiyah that's become famous. This is for those people. This is why the Urafah recite this. And they promoted this. Recite this. Why? For the purpose that when you recite this, you move those different layers so that you go closer to the wilayah of Amir al-Mu'mineen. This is why you recite this. You begin to understand Tawheed. And the purpose of this movement is Tawheed. The purpose of this wilayah is Tawheed. So in this way, Yunus was tested. All of the prophets, sirran, were found inside of the holy prophets. All of the prophets, they were all there. They were the secret of secrets. For example, when in philosophy, when Ibn Sina, for example, talks about the aql qudsi, where Allah reveals a revelation on the part of the intellect, in the same way, guidance and help through all of the prophets and all of the awliya was because of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Each one of them was tested because of this. And each one of them was raised in status. All of the prophets had all of them were awliya of Al Muhammad. And each one of the imams, therefore, are a reflection. According to some tradition, it says that all of the imams are the same, but Amir al-Mu'mineen is above all of them. According to some scholars, it was like this. This only changed in the time of Sheikh Saduq, for example. There have been classical followers and teachers and ulama of Al Muhammad who have said that if all 11 imams on one side, but Amir al-Mu'mineen's reality is something far greater. Why do they say that? They say because from the reality of Amir al-Mu'mineen comes all of the other realities of the imams. In the same way as Amir al-Mu'mineen's position is, in the same way they said that the 12th imam's position is. 12th imam is the seal of all of the imams. They say Amir al-Mu'mineen was what? The seal of wilayah for all of the prophets. The final prophet came, but the event of Ghadir is fundamental. Why? Because the prophecy of the prophet was sealed in ink when the wilayah of Amir al-Mu'mineen was declared. 124,000 prophets. The seal of all of those prophets come on Ghadir. And here, the tradition says, the verse of the Quran says, Ya ayyuha rasul, balligh. Tell them what? If you haven't done, you've done nothing. Your prophecy is at stake. What is it? Wilayah of Amir al-Mu'mineen. There's a point to think about for people. What is this point that nullifies all prophecy if it's not conveyed to the people? And that reality is this. So what is Amir al-Mu'mineen essentially? Amir al-Mu'mineen essentially is the mirror of God. It's where God looks at creation through reflection. Or if I have said, they've said that when Allah manifested himself, it's like he was looking at himself in a mirror. All of creation is a manifestation from this mirror. So it's the mirror that Allah looked into to manifest all of creation. So the first substance of creation was the mirror. In that he looked at it, manifestation was what? The highest level is Amir al-Mu'mineen. That's the mirror in the same way. When, for example, Yaqub was looking at Yusuf, what did he say? He says, Yusuf was a mirror that I saw the divine in. And here when Allah looked at all of creation, the mirror that Allah used was the mirror of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And this is where all of creation comes into play. Everything in front of you is why? Because of that mirror, that manifestation. What is Amir al-Mu'mineen then? He's that hijab, the highest level of hijab between us and Allah. Is that barzakh. He's the in-between point. And in the same way, he's ma'rifat al-kubra. He's that ma'rifah. To understand Amir al-Mu'mineen is what? Is to understand the highest levels of existence, but know something far more fundamental, and that is this. Ayatollah Hassan Zada Amli says, he says that Ism A'zam is Al-Insan al-Kamil, and the perfect man is Amir al-Mu'mineen. Within the name of Ali lies Ism A'zam. Within the name of Ali, you can move mountains from place. Why? Because Allah says, he says, I am A'ala wa hadha Ali, and this is Ali. Who is Ali then? From the name of Allah. Allah named him from his names, and he named him the Most High. And the Quran calls him Ali al-Hakim. He's Hakim. In another place he says Ali al-Azim. In another place he says Ali al-Kabir, for example. You find all of these things in the Quran is mentioned. Which is that tongue that Allah uses, is the tongue which Allah himself calls in the Quran Ali al-Hakim. And so all of the tajalliyat of Allah's names here are found through Amir al-Mu'mineen. And this is where we understand Tawheed. It's not something which is easily understood. Why? Because this is something which is felt. It isn't something which can be described. The reality of this is something which is felt. And so this is why in a tradition, it says that when one of the companions comes to Salman and Jundub, they say that tell us something strange that you've heard from Amir al-Mu'mineen. And at that moment they reply, and they say this, that person who does not believe in the nur is what? Is a person who has left, is a doubter or a murtad. When asked about what is this nur is the nur of the manifestation of the wilayah of Amir al-Mu'mineen, nothing else. A person who has not understood the wilayah of Amir al-Mu'mineen is not a Muslim in the way that Allah wanted him to be a Muslim. And this is something which is important. You see, look, we have one thing which is jurisprudence. We have another thing which is our beliefs. But the highest level, when kufr is removed, everyone has kufr in them. Why? Because kufr is a hijab between us and Allah. If you don't believe in that nur and that nur of wilayah, essentially you've gone back and you become a doubter, you become a murtad in the spiritual realm. Yes, you remain a Muslim. But the fact is that you'll never be able to reach that highest level because it's blocked. And this is why in another tradition, when a person comes to Salman and he says to Salman, he says, Salman, tell us what is the weirdest thing that you've heard from the Prophet? Says to Salman. He says, what is the weirdest thing? Salman then, and this is narrated in Sulaym ibn Qais, by the way. Sulaym ibn Qais narrates this. He says that the weirdest thing I heard from the Prophet was this, that around the arsh of Allah is 90,000 angels, and arsh is the highest maqam. Says these 90,000 angels go around the arsh and they do three things. They believe and they follow everything that Amir al-Mu'mineen does, firstly. Secondly, they do bara'at on the enemies of Amir al-Mu'mineen. But thirdly, they pray for istighfar for all of the followers of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Says, this is the weirdest thing that I've heard. Again, it goes forward the tradition and says, it says that now Sulaym then comes. He comes to Miqdad. He says, Miqdad, what is the weirdest thing that you've heard? And this is something telling. He says, the weirdest thing that I've heard is this. The most ajib thing is this. It says that the Prophet of God said, when he wishes khair upon someone, when he wishes good when he wishes good upon someone, when Allah wants to purify someone for his purpose, Allah puts in the love of Amir al-Mu'mineen, puts in the nur of Amir al-Mu'mineen. But when he deprives a person, he takes out that love of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And this is why it says, this is why we say, don't ever compromise on the wilayah of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Let me tell you a story. Story goes like this. Allama Amini, Sahib al-Ghadir. One night he comes into the shrine of Amir al-Mu'mineen and he sees that a Bedouin within Iraq, Bedouin comes and he walks in And Allama Amin is standing there reciting ziyarah, and this Bedouin goes and he grabs onto the zari of the Imam, and he says to the Imam very rudely, he says, Ali, if you don't cure my leg by tomorrow Fajr time, I'll never come back here and I'll leave you and I'll leave your pathway. Allama Amini says, look, that's a big challenge. Let me sit down and see what happens. Allama Amini says, I didn't sleep the whole night. I was sitting there watching. I was seeing what's going to happen. Amir al-Mu'mineen. Look at Amir al-Mu'mineen. Rahmah of Allah. That's the door of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Amir al-Mu'mineen, even a person who's rude to him, but a person who comes to Amir al-Mu'mineen, his door is such, he doesn't send anybody empty-handed. At that moment, Allama Amini says, look, this guy is really rude. He's rude to our master. So he goes and he sits down, he falls asleep, the Bedouin, he wakes up, scratches his beard, looks at his leg, falls asleep again. Allama Amini says, the whole night I was watching, I couldn't sleep because I wanted to see what happens. He says that at Fajr time, this man wakes up, shakes his leg, he gets up, realizes he's been cured. He says he's so rude, he comes up to the shrine, he goes, Ali, thank you very much, see you some other time. Walks out. Allama Amini gets up, he says, Amir al-Mu'mineen, 20 years of my life I've been coming to you and knocking on your door. He says, my leg is also paralyzed. How comes you've never cured my leg, but this person who came, you cured his leg? Didn't I write al-Ghadir? Am I not a mujtahid? That night he goes to sleep, Amir al-Mu'mineen comes in his sleep. Imam says to him, he says, you are mujtahid, that's for your own benefit, it will benefit you in the hereafter. You wrote al-Ghadir, this is my haqq on you that you write something like that in the defense of my wilayah. But as far as your foot goes, he says, Amini, I've given you something on the day of judgment that you'll get. I've given you something far greater, but Amini, even if you were to threaten me and say you'll never come back, I know you'll always come back to my door. So you can't threaten me by telling me you're not going to come back. This person would have gone, never come back, but Amini, you'll always come back. But know one thing, your reward that I've given you is far greater. This is why I put you in this state, because there's something far great for you. That is Amir al-Mu'mineen. That door, and Allama Amini accepted. Had Allama Amini turned around and said, Amir al-Mu'mineen, I just want my foot back, Amir al-Mu'mineen would have given to him. Why? Because Amir al-Mu'mineen doesn't turn anyone away. But one has to understand this. This is why we find in the Bible, Jesus, when he decides to go and he's going towards Damascus, it's in the Bible. You can go and search this. It's in the New Testament. It says a person from the Samaritans comes to him and he asks him. He says that, are you the prophet of Akhir Zaman? It's in the Bible. Of the last days? He says, no. He says, are you Elia? He says, no. He says, are you the Masih? He says, yes. Within history, we find that people made the iddia that they were the Masih and the final prophet. But you've never found within history that anybody claimed to be Elia. You find in tradition that when Amir al-Mu'mineen goes in front of Khaybar and all of the Jews are gathered there, at that moment he says to all of the Jews, he says, O Jews, know that I am the Elia within the Torah that's been predicted. And when he goes in front of the Christians of Najran, he says, I am that Elia found in your Bible. This is that way. Amir al-Mu'mineen's name is Isma Adam, if you understand it. Give you another tradition. Amir al-Mu'mineen gave 7,000 miracles within Kufa. 7,000. And in fact, even the followers of Amir al-Mu'mineen gave miracles within Kufa. Forget just Amir al-Mu'mineen. We'll look at some of these traditions in a minute. It says Amir al-Mu'mineen was walking and he comes to the river Euphrates. He finds that there is a Christian standing next to the river Euphrates. It's not the Christian of today. We're going back. This is the Christians of 1400 years ago at Ma'rifah. At that moment, the Christian looks towards his Muslim and he smiles. And he begins to walk over water and he gets to the other side of the water. Amir al-Mu'mineen looks at him and he says, if your religion, this Christian looks back to Imam and says, if your religion is the haqq, let's see what you can do. The tradition says the Imam hovers over the sky and comes onto the other side. And at that moment, this person says, how did you do this? He says, let me ask you a question. How did you do this? He says that it's been narrated in our traditions by our prophets that whenever we are in problems, you should call upon Elia. I call upon Elia and I begin to walk over the water. Amir al-Mu'mineen looks at him and he smiles at him. He says, the very Elia that you call is the Elia, is the one who hovered over the water. At that moment, that person comes and he says, well, let me give you bayah and declare the fact that there is no prophet but the final prophet and you are the wali of Allah. It's a reality. Well, Isma Adam is Amir al-Mu'mineen. Isma Azam, the name of Allah. Anything can happen with the name of Amir al-Mu'minin if you only understand what the name is. Nothing, ulama have said this. They've said, look, if you have a problem, recite the name of Amir al-Mu'minin, because the name of Amir al-Mu'minin is such. We don't understand this name. The name in itself. The prophets used this name. The awliya have used this name. The people of before have used this name. It is important for us to use these names in our life. It's the secrets, this is the sir. Secrets are found with. This is why you look at some of the Sufis then, the Darwish, they use the name of Amir al-Mu'minin to perform some very, very fundamental things. Things which are defying. That's 7,000 miracles is not a small thing within Kufa. Just within Kufa alone, 7,000 miracles. But look, for us to understand Amir al-Mu'minin requires us to be a servant of the Imam. For us to be a true servant of the Imam requires us to understand what servitude is. Don't ever become arrogant to think that I've become something. Are you greater than Habib ibn Madahir? Look at the tradition. Habib ibn Madahir, Shaykh al-Awliya, outside of the Ahlul Bayt, the greatest of all is who? Habib ibn Madahir. In fact, forget Habib ibn Madahir for a minute. Let's look at the prophets. Let's look at the prophet. Who's the Shaykh Anbiya? All of the prophets, the leader of the prophets is Ibrahim. Rasulullah goes on the Mi'raj. As he goes on the Mi'raj, he sees Musa. He comes to Musa. Musa says to him, congratulations for the Mi'raj. He says, who have you appointed as your wasi after you? He says, I've appointed my cousin Ali. Allah has appointed him. He says, congratulations upon you. Goes a level higher. Level higher, he comes in front of Isa. Says to Isa, tell me. Isa says the very same thing. Congratulates him. Who is your wasi? The reply comes, my wasi is? Who? Ali ibn Abi Talib. Same thing, congratulations. One by one, he meets all of the prophets until he gets to a final stage. At that stage, he says to Jibreel, he says, I haven't met Ibrahim yet. Where's Ibrahim? He says, let me take you to Ibrahim. Why isn't Ibrahim coming to meet me? He says, because Ibrahim is doing something. Let's take you to Ibrahim. Takes him to Ibrahim. The tradition says that there was a tree there. The tree was in the shape of ribs, like the ribs of a sheep. Within the ribs you found, within the branches, there were babies there. Within the babies, there were branches in the mouth of the babies. Every time the branch would fall, Ibrahim would run and put the branch there. What are these branches? These branches are the branches of Ma'rifah. What is this tree? This is the tree of life. Who are these children? At that moment, Ibrahim says to the Prophet, he says, I asked Allah that I could serve those babies who have passed away of the followers of Ali ibn Abi Talib, to give them ma'rifah within heaven. And so therefore, whenever a branch falls out, the knowledge begins to fall. I go in and print that knowledge on those babies, because I've taken it upon myself to educate those babies who have passed away of the Shi'a of Amir al-Mu'minin. This is the man. Ibrahim wants to be a wali from the wilayah of Amir al-Mu'minin. Ibrahim, Shaykh al-Anbiya. So now understand the status of somebody like Habib ibn Madahir. Which Habib? Shaykh al-Awliya. Shaykh of everyone. They say Sayyid Ali Qadi. Why is he come into the world for? Because of the fact that his father, who couldn't have any children. Today, look at all of the ulama, Maraji, Urafa, all of them owe a debt to Sayyid Ali Qadi. If this Qadi came into the world because his father goes up to the shrine of Habib ibn Madahir, doesn't trouble Sayyid al-Shuhada. He says, Habib, give me a son who will illuminate the entire world with knowledge. Allah gives him who? Sayyid Ali Qadi. Habib ibn Madahir, that person. They say about Habib ibn Madahir, when he looked at the ocean and he saw the movement of the ocean, he realized that Muawiyah was dead. He says to the people, he says, oh people, Muawiyah has died in Damascus. He says, Habib, how do you know? He says, because I can see the oceans carrying the news of the death of Muawiyah. People said, you're lying. This was a hujjah of Habib on the people. The same with Maytham al-Dammar. When Maytham al-Dammar comes to one of the disciples of Amir al-Mu'minin, he says, I can see you're blind and I can see blood coming from your head onto your bed. I can see these things. People said, you're lying. What happens? This very companion in the time of Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, his daughter comes to him and he says to him, Father, grab a sword and fight. He says that you tell me which direction the enemy is coming because I'm blind. At that moment, they hit him on the head. He says, Maytham was correct. Why? Because Maytham was taught a knowledge. Manaya wal balaya from Amir al-Mu'minin. This is Amir al-Mu'minin. Now imagine Maytham al-Tammar and imagine Habib ibn Madahir. Habib ibn Madahir is that person who has the knowledge of the future. But they say His humbleness was such. The highest maqam of wilaya is the maqam of humbleness. Says he was humble. Says when one of the companions comes, says when a hilal comes to Habib on the night of Ashura, one thing happens. They say when Sayyid al-Shuhada told the people that this is what's going to happen tomorrow, Hilal saw the color of Zainab changed. He comes around to Habib, he says, the daughter of the Prophet is worried. Habib, should we go and show the daughter of the Prophet that we're with her? At that moment, Habib doesn't turn around and say, you've misinterpreted Zainab. What is Zainab? You've looked at Zainab from your own eyes, and this tells us that many a time when Imam manifests himself upon you as well, in your daily lives, you see the Imam according to your own understanding. The higher that you become, the more your understanding becomes deeper. But look at the tradition, it's beautiful. The tradition says Habib ibn Mullah, he doesn't turn around to his follower and he says to him, listen, this is what it is. He says, no, okay, what do you want me to do? Humbles himself. Because sometimes you humble yourself in front of the followers of Ahlul Bayt. You know that they don't have a comprehensive understanding. But he nurtures them. He says, what do you want us to do? He says, let's go to the tent of Sayyid al-Shuhada. The tradition says he goes to the tent of Sayyid al-Shuhada with the rope as he takes his amama off, chucks himself on the floor, takes the dirt, puts the dirt on the floor. He says that your servant is here for you. This is wilaya. If you're the Shias of the Ahlul Bayt, the next time you go to Najaf or you go to Amir al-Mu'mineen or you go to Sayyid al-Shuhada, you go to any of the Imams, don't think to yourself that let's take a picture next to the Zawi of the Imam and go like the way Habib goes. Put your forehead on the ground, put the dirt on your head and say to your master, your servants are here. It's only when you humble yourself in front of the Ahlul Bayt is when they start giving you things. And this is how your maqam becomes higher. Maqam only becomes higher when you humble yourself in front of the Ahlul Bayt. That's the level of the Ahlul Bayt that we need to get to. This is what Habib is teaching us. This is what Maytham al-Dammar is teaching us. Which Maytham al-Dammar? Forget Abul Fadl Abbas. Forget Ali Akbar. They say that there is a nahar, there's a river of wilaya. This wilaya is the wilaya of Ali Akbar. Go into the Quran and see. Khidr and Musa. What does Musa say when he's with Harun? Musa and Harun are going. They come, and I can't, the entire tradition is long, it'll take me a long time to summarize. It says that he comes in front of a river. You've seen it in the Quran, right? He puts the fish there, the fish comes to life. He walks away from that place. And at that moment, he says to Harun, he says, where's the fish? He says, I forgot the fish. He says, that's the sign, let's go. That's where we're meant to meet Khidr. Or what is that river? According to certain tradition, that is the river of the wilaya of Ali Akbar, let alone the wilaya of Amir al-Mu'mineen. That is in a land of why? Because Ali Akbar represents the Jamal of Hussein. Abbas represents the Jalal of Hussein. Both of these things, and look, if I had enough time, if we had a separate lecture on Imam Hussein, we'd look at the dimensions of Imam Hussein. What is Hussein? Hussein has two manifestations. One is in the shape of the Jalal of Allah. One is in the shape of the Jamal of Allah. When Allah tested all of the prophets, He wouldn't test them with the Jalal of Abbas, but when He realized that their hearts are soft and they can't take anymore, He would test them with the Jamal of Ali Akbar. That's the difference. Look, Ali Akbar is an entire ocean. You think to yourself that he's a 27-year-old person on the plains of Karbala. That's not the case. He comes back, he's thirsty. He's not thirsty. He's thirsty for something else. Understand Ali Akbar? Habib ibn Mullah had grabbed just the cloth of Abbas and he became Shaykh al-Awliya. Imagine when you go to the shrine of Abbas or Ali Akbar. Next time you go to Ali Akbar, go to Ali Akbar. Many people don't go. They go to Sayyid al-Shuhada. They forget right in the corner there. Next to Sayyid al-Shuhada is Ali Akbar. Why did Allah why did Sayyid al-Shuhada want Ali Akbar to be close to him? Why? Because the Jamal of Allah and the Jamal of the Prophet is manifested in Ali Akbar. That's a level of wilaya that we need to understand before we can go any higher. I don't want to go any deeper than that. We could go much further than that. My time is running out. That's why I don't want to go, because prayer time is coming. I'd really love to talk about this, and I will talk about it. I'm going to continue just 10 minutes more, just to finish off. If you want me to continue more, 10 minutes.
We want some time for questions and answers as well. Yeah, so Bismillah. Bismillah.
So in this way, you see, I think each one of these deserves a lecture within itself. Ali Akbar, his wilaya. Al-Fadl Abbas, his wilaya. Abbas, that person, if you looked at the universe, he could make him Salman. Imagine that. These are all stages. Each one of these are stages in the divine. Each one of these in Alam-e-Barzakh are stages. They teach you in Alam-e-Barzakh. Those followers of the Ahlul Bayt who have not been completed in this world, in Alam Barzakh, those Ahlul Bayt, their nur will start teaching you and guiding you of wilayah. But where does this all go? Everything starts off from Ali and everything ends upon Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam. That's where everything starts. Everything starts and it ends on this. Why did Karbala take place? Why? Because the enemy had both for Amir al-Mu'minin, otherwise they had no issue with Sayyid al-Shuhada. And why did Abbas do what he did? Out of the love of Amir al-Mu'minin, because Amir al-Mu'minin had said to him, son, protect the son of the Prophet. Amir al-Mu'minin. Therefore, what is the scale? What is the mizan? In Islam, the mizan for heaven is the intensity of love in your heart for Amir al-Mu'minin, because the Prophet of God has said the mizan is Amir al-Mu'minin. Says that Ali, only those people will love you who are born in the right way, and those people will hate you who have been born in the way that they shouldn't have been born, according to Islam. Only those people who will love you, who are your followers, who are on that pathway of guidance. The munafiq will hate you. And this is why you find many Sunni scholars have narrated. They narrate back from the companions. And the companions said this: when we wanted to know a munafiq amongst us, we would do the dhikr of Amir al-Mu'mineen. The minute we saw their faces would turn. Either they smiled or they frowned. When they frowned, we realized these are the munafiq from amongst us. The mizan is Amir al-Mu'mineen. This is why it says, look at all of our scriptures. Mamata walam ya'rif imam zamanihi mata mitatun jahiliya. That person who dies without the ma'rif of the imam, mata mitatun jahiliya. Somebody comes to the sixth imam. They ask him, they say, what is jahala here? What does jahil mean here? The death of a jahil. You know what he turns around and he says? He goes into great detail about what it is. But one of those things is this, that a person who has not understood the nur of Amir al-Mu'mineen has gone towards that. He says, nifaq, if a person doesn't understand the imam, they're a munafiq. If a person doesn't understand their imam, they are dhal. The tradition says this. The imam goes further to say that. Says that they are dhal. They're misguided. They're munafiq. They're people who have left, they're doubters, they've left the pathway. This is why it's important to understand. This is why when the tradition says period of jahiliyyah, the imam describes, he says, what does jahil mean here? The death of a jahil. It means a person who's a munafiq, the death of a munafiq. The death of a person who's misguided. The death of a person who's not understood. A person, therefore, who has not understood Amir al-Mu'minin has not understood perfection. A person who's not understood Amir al-Mu'minin has not understood who they are as a person. Has not understood what insan is. Absolutely. Why? Because Amir al-Mu'minin, if you look deep inside, is the consciousness of man that awakens that consciousness. There's a lot that we can say, there's a lot that I've written. But the final thing, when you go to Najaf, what does the ziyarah say? The ziyarah says, Assalamu alayka ya nafs Allah. Amir al-Mu'minin has been told that you are the nafs of Allah. What does the nafs of Allah mean? Look, it's so easy. I know that maybe 100 people stand up and say, well, isn't this shirk? Isn't this ghulu? What is this? No, you haven't understood this, because the maqam of this spirituality that we're talking about is something else. If Imam Hussein can be Damullah, Yadullah, Ainullah. Why Ainullah? Because Allah, what Imam Hussein sees is what Allah wants him to see. What Imam Hussein is seeing, the eye in itself is the eye of Allah, because Allah doesn't have an eye. Had Allah had an eye in the physical, the manifestation of the all-seeing eye in the physical world is what? The eye of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Nafsullah, therefore, is what? Nafsullah. Why? Because Rasulullah said that Ali is my nafs. Wherever it was, there's a tradition which is narrated by Ayatollah Naini. Now, I've only narrated this once before, and I get very scared when I narrate this. Many ulama have said this shouldn't be narrated. So if you want, you can edit it later. But the tradition, Ayatollah Naini says this. He says, Amir al-Mu'mineen walks into the room. The Prophet of God didn't have a shadow. Amir al-Mu'mineen didn't have a shadow. The tradition says that he goes towards the Prophet and he sits on the Prophet in such a way that the Prophet absorbs him completely. They become one person. And then he comes out again and he begins to walk again. Why? Why? Because in the physical world, they're two people, but their nur is one. The nur is one, because that primordial reality, the light was one. Who is Amir al-Mu'mineen? Amir al-Mu'mineen is nur. Who's the Prophet? No, nur can't be separated. Light is everywhere. Can you separate light? No. It says that when the actual essences of light came together, they unified in one. Nafsullah, therefore, or nafs of the Prophet, therefore, means this. In that, what is nafs? What is nafs? And nafs is that driver, that secret inside of you, and the highest level of nafs which you find amongst prophecy, the nafs of the Prophet, therefore, is Amir al-Mu'mineen. I'm going to conclude on that, and I'm going to open the floor up for questions. If anybody has any questions. It's a complicated discussion. I know the last discussion I was on Facebook watching, they put it on, the last discussion on Amir al-Mu'mineen. In 3 hours, there was over 1,000 hits on that. And there were good comments, but one person turns around on that and says, I didn't understand this as a shirk. And surely these people are doing ghulu. And I said, look, if only we understood this in an academic way, you'd understand. And this discussion isn't, this is why I said Muhammadi Trust is the only place that has an academic discussion. And this is why we raise this is why we feel comfortable raising these topics, because otherwise on the member you cannot raise these topics. But anyhow, any questions?
I won't break with tradition, and I'll ask the first question. You were reciting, you were relating about Ghadir, and the term baligh is used. Why not qul? What special meaning does that word have?
It's a fi'l amr is a command word. Transfer to them, tell them. Qul here would just been a saying. I think just a bit of a technical discussion. He wouldn't say qul anywhere there. It wouldn't have been said qul. But here is a command word. You've been to iblagh. It's a message which has been told in command form to be revealed, and it has the emphasis of that. Yes.
I've got two questions, just two. The first question is, when we talk about Prophet Abraham and he was thrown into the fire, my understanding he was speaking to Gabriel at that time. And he said, now I'm looking for help from Allah, not your help. So that was my first question. He was saying that he asked for Imam Ali.
Yeah.
And the second question, can you just expand on that? And Ali is the dot underneath the bear. I've heard that a few times. I just don't understand that concept.
Yeah.
If you could expand on that.
In the first instance, there are two ways of asking help. One is through your tongue. One is through that reality that calls and beseeches Allah. As we said, that manifestation that Allah uses to help, that's sir. For everything, let's say for example, everything there's an angel. Even your du'as, when they're accepted and everything goes into motion, it doesn't come straight away. There's a motion that takes place. Let's say you want to eat. Food, even for Maryam, food came down. That wasila of coming down, that wasila of eating, that movement of acceptance, they're angels for that process that takes place, because it's a process of Allah. Allah is Ghaib al-Ghayub, Allah is Alam al-Jam, Allah is Ism al-Jam, the name in itself. Allah therefore, for our creation, uses a system which is in place. And that's sir, it's not physical. It's within ourselves, there's a particular soul within ourselves. Call it Ruh al-Qudus, that soul, that movement that Allah used to help Ibrahim was the pure usage of Amir al-Mu'mineen, the Haqiqat Alawiyah. But look at the tradition, it's beautiful. The tradition says Habib ibn Mallah, he doesn't turn around to his follower and he says to him, listen, this is what it is. He says, no, okay, what do you want me to do? Humbles himself. Because sometimes you humble yourself in front of the followers of Ahlul Bayt. You know that they don't have a comprehensive understanding. But he nurtures them. He says, what do you want us to do? He says, let's go to the tent of Sayyid al-Shuhada. The tradition says he goes to the tent of Sayyid al-Shuhada with the rope as he takes his amama off, chucks himself on the floor, takes the dirt, puts the dirt on the floor. He says that your servant is here for you. This is wilayah. If you're the Shi'as of the Ahlul Bayt, the next time you go to Najaf or you go to Amir al-Mu'mineen or you go to Sayyid al-Shuhada, you go to any of the Imams, don't think to yourself that let's take a picture next to the Zari of the Imam and go like the way Habib goes. Put your forehead on the ground, put the dirt on your head and say to your master, your servants are here. It's only when you humble yourself in front of the Ahlul Bayt is when they start giving you things. And this is how your maqam becomes higher. Maqam only becomes higher when you humble yourself in front of the Ahlul Bayt. That's the level of the Ahlul Bayt that we need to get to. This is what Habib is teaching us. This is what Maytham al-Dammar is teaching us. Which Maytham al-Dammar? Forget Abu al-Fadl Abbas. Forget Ali Akbar. They say that there is a nahar, there's a river of wilayah. This wilayah is the wilayah of Ali Akbar. Go into the Quran and see Khidr and Musa. What does Musa say when he's with Harun? Musa and Harun are going. They come, and I can't, the entire tradition is long, it'll take me a long time. Summarize. Says that he comes in front of a river. You've seen it in the Quran, right? He puts the fish there, the fish comes to life. He walks away from that place. And at that moment, he says to Harun, he says, where's the fish? He says, I forgot the fish. He says, that's the sign, let's go. That's where we're meant to meet Khidr. Or what is that river? According to certain tradition, that is the river of the wilayah of Ali Akbar, let alone the wilayah of Amir al-Mu'mineen. That is in a land of why? Because Ali Akbar represents the Jamal of Hussein. Abbas represents the Jalal of Hussein. Both of these things, and look, if I had enough time, if we had a separate lecture on Imam Hussein, we'd look at the dimensions of Imam Hussein. What is Hussein? Hussein has two manifestations. One is in the shape of the Jalal of Allah. One is in the shape of the Jamal of Allah. When Allah tested all of the prophets, He wouldn't test them with the Jalal of Abbas, but when He realized that their hearts are soft and they can't take anymore, He would test them with the Jamal of Ali Akbar. That's the difference. Look, Ali Akbar is an entire ocean. You think to yourself that he's a 27-year-old person on the plains of Karbala. That's not the case. He comes back, he's thirsty. He's not thirsty. He's thirsty for something else. Understand Ali Akbar? Habib ibn Mudahid grabbed just the cloth of Abbas and he became Shaykh al-Awliya. Imagine when you go to the shrine of Abbas or Ali Akbar. Next time you go to Ali Akbar, go to Ali Akbar. Many people don't go. They go to Sayyid al-Shuhada. They forget right in the corner there. Next to Sayyid al-Shuhada is Ali Akbar. Why did Allah why did Sayyid al-Shuhada want Ali Akbar to be close to him? Why? Because the Jamal of Allah and the Jamal of the Prophet is manifested in Ali Akbar. That's a level of wilayah that we need to understand before we can go any higher. I don't want to go any deeper than that. We could go much further than that. My time is running out. That's why I don't want to go, because prayer time is coming. I'd really love to talk about this, and I will talk about it. I'm going to continue just 10 minutes more, just to finish off. If you want me to continue more, 10 minutes.
We want some time for questions and answers as well. Yeah, so Bismillah. Bismillah.
So in this way, you see, I think each one of these deserves a lecture within itself. Ali Akbar, his wilayah. Al-Fadl Abbas, his wilayah. Abbas, that person, if you look to the universe, he could make him Salman. Imagine that. These are all stages. Each one of these are stages in the divine. Each one of these in Alam-e-Barzakh are stages. They teach you in Alam-e-Barzakh. Those followers of the Ahlul Bayt who have not been completed in this world, in Alam-e-Barzakh, those Ahlul Bayt, their nur will start teaching you and guiding you of wilayah. But where does this all go? Everything starts off from Ali and everything ends upon Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. That's where everything starts. Everything starts and it ends on this. Why did Karbala take place? Why? Because the enemy had both for Amir al-Mu'mineen, otherwise they had no issue with Sayyid al-Shuhada. And why did Abbas do what he did? Out of the love of Amir al-Mu'mineen, because Amir al-Mu'mineen had said to him, son, protect the son of the Prophet. Amir al-Mu'mineen. Therefore, what is the scale? What is the mizan? In Islam, the mizan for heaven is the intensity of love in your heart for Amir al-Mu'mineen, because the Prophet of God has said the mizan is Amir al-Mu'mineen. Says that Ali, only those people will love you who are born in the right way, and those people will hate you who have been born in the way that they shouldn't have been born, according to Islam. Only those people who will love you, who are your followers, who are on that pathway of guidance. The munafiq will hate you. And this is why you find many Sunni scholars have narrated. They narrate back from the companions. And the companions said this: when we wanted to know a munafiq amongst us, we would do the dhikr of Amir al-Mu'mineen. The minute we saw their faces would turn. Either they smiled or they frowned. When they frowned, we realized these are the munafiq from amongst us. The mizan is Amir al-Mu'mineen. This is why it says, look at all of our scriptures. Man mata wa lam ya'rif imam zamanihi mata mitatun jahiliya. That person who dies without the ma'rif of the imam, mata mitatun jahiliya. Somebody comes to the sixth imam, they ask him, they say, what is jahala? What does jahil mean here? The death of a jahil. You know what he turns around and he says? He goes into great detail about what it is. But one of those things is this, that a person who has not understood the nur of Amir al-Mu'mineen has gone towards that. He says, nifaq, if a person doesn't understand the imam, they're a munafiq. If a person doesn't understand their imam, they are dhal. The tradition says this. The imam goes further to say that. Says that they are dhal. They're misguided. They're munafiq. They're people who have left, they're doubters, they've left the pathway. This is why it's important to understand. This is why when the tradition says period of jahiliyyah, the imam describes, he says, what does jahil mean here? The death of a jahil. It means a person who's a munafiq, the death of a munafiq. The death of a person who's misguided. The death of a person who's not understood. A person, therefore, who has not understood Amir al-Mu'mineen has not understood perfection. A person who's not understood Amir al-Mu'mineen has not understood who they are as a person. Has not understood what insan is. Absolutely. Why? Because Amir al-Mu'mineen, if you look deep inside, is the consciousness of man that awakens that consciousness. There's a lot that we can say, there's a lot that I've written. But the final thing, when you go to Najaf, what does the ziyarah say? The ziyarah says, Assalamu alayka ya nafs Allah. Amir al-Mu'mineen has been told that you are the nafs of Allah. What does the nafs of Allah mean? Look, it's so easy. I know that maybe 100 people stand up and say, well, isn't this shirk? Isn't this ghulu? What is this? No, you haven't understood this, because the maqam of this spirituality that we're talking about is something else. If Imam Hussein can be Damullah, Yadullah, Ainullah. Why Ainullah? Because Allah, what Imam Hussein sees is what Allah wants him to see. What Imam Hussein is seeing, the eye in itself is the eye of Allah, because Allah doesn't have an eye. Had Allah had an eye in the physical, the manifestation of the all-seeing eye in the physical world is what? The eye of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Nafsullah, therefore, is what? Nafsullah. Why? Because Rasulullah said that Ali is my nafs. Wherever it was, there's a tradition which is narrated by Ayatollah Naini. Now, I've only narrated this once before, and I get very scared when I narrate this. Many ulama have said this shouldn't be narrated. So if you want, you can edit it later. But the tradition, Ayatollah Naini says this. He says, Amir al-Mu'mineen walks into the room. The Prophet of God didn't have a shadow. Amir al-Mu'mineen didn't have a shadow. The tradition says that he goes towards the Prophet and he sits on the Prophet in such a way that the Prophet absorbs him completely. They become one person. And then he comes out again and he begins to walk again. Why? Why? Because in the physical world, they're two people, but their nur is one. The nur is one, because that primordial reality, the light, was one. Who is Amir al-Mu'mineen? Amir al-Mu'mineen is nur. Who's the Prophet? No, nur can't be separated. Light is everywhere. Can you separate light? No. It says that when the actual essences of light came together, they unified in one. Nafsullah, therefore, or nafs of the Prophet, therefore, means this. In that, what is nafs? What is nafs? And nafs is that driver, that secret inside of you. And the highest level of nafs which you find amongst prophecy, the nafs of the Prophet, therefore, is Amir al-Mu'mineen. I'm going to conclude on that, and I'm going to open the floor up for questions. If anybody has any questions. It's a complicated discussion. I know the last discussion I was on Facebook watching, they put it on, the last discussion on Amir al-Mu'mineen, in 3 hours there was over 1,000 hits on that, and there were good comments, but one person turns around on that and says, I didn't understand this as a shirk. And surely these people are doing ghulu. And I said, look, if only we understood this in an academic way, you'd understand. And this discussion isn't, this is why I said Muhammadi Trust is the only place that has an academic discussion. And this is why we raise this is why we feel comfortable raising these topics, because otherwise on the member you cannot raise these topics. But anyhow, any questions?
I won't break with tradition, and I'll ask the first question. You were reciting, you were relating about Ghadir, and the term baligh is used. Why not qul? What special meaning does that word have?
It's fi'l amr is a command word. Transfer to them, tell them. Qul here would just been a saying. I think just a bit of a technical discussion. He wouldn't say qul anywhere there. It wouldn't have been said qul. But here is a command word. You've been to iblagh. It's a message which has been told in command form to be revealed, and it has the emphasis of that.
The other thing I was going to mention is by virtue of the event, the celebration we have today, there are certainly books that the Muhammadi Trust has published about Imam Ali, and these are available at a very kindly they've reduced the price for this evening for these books. So those of you who have an interest, please do look at the book collection at the back. Thank you very much. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.